It's always an occasion when someone has completed a book, and there's a lot of local pride here tonight. Many of you are familiar with the Brucato family. If you are new to town or don't know a lot, this book is a memoir of Charles J. Brucato Sr., written by his son, Charles J. Brucato Jr., along with his brother John. The Brucato family is well known in town. Charles is a retired attorney. His brother John was an educator and principal at Milford High School. Their brother Joe was also an educator and teacher at Milford High School, and started a local band that is still in existence, the Jody's Band. And their sister, this is Marilyn. Is she here tonight?
Yes, she is.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hi.
So I'm going to turn this over to Charlie in just a second. Such feedback on this. Do you have a mic from the TV station? No.
Yeah.
If you project, you may not even know this. It's better than feedback. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over and give us a warm welcome to Charlie.
Thank you, Ann, and the Friends of the Milford Library to set up this occasion to promote my book. I spent a lot of time upstairs, and I have special thanks to the people who provided me with help during my research, especially with the microfilm machine, which I never got right still. I see so many family and friends out there, but for those of you that don't know us, we are lifelong residents of Milford. John was an educator and I'm an attorney. We lived in the small house that Oliva's Market is attached to. And that's where our family of 6 grew up. And I'm proud to say that we were proud members of the Plains. I began writing this book in the winter of 2021 with the intention of distributing it to the younger members of my family. I wanted them to know about my father and all the successes, trials, and tribulations he had experienced in his 83 years on earth. I have always thought it important that they know about and understand their heritage. My brother John, having recently retired, loved the idea and offered to assist me. Since I was the oldest child of Charles Brucato and he was the youngest, it proved to be an excellent collaboration. As we were deep into our research, John convinced me that the story would be of interest to people in our hometown and possibly other Americans. He reasoned that our father's life story was one which symbolized the lives of what Tom Brokaw has dubbed the greatest generation. This book is not an attempt to glorify my father as an athlete, coach, and war hero, although he was all 3. Rather, we have attempted to show that despite his many accomplishments, he, like many of his contemporaries, was ultimately broken by the tragedies of the 20th century and the horrors of war. Many of you are old enough to remember the Milford I grew up in and the names and the nicknames of the people and places that play a prominent part in this book. Hopefully, the book will take you back to a time when we believed in God, family, and country. It has been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I have put together some which I will hope prove that to be true. I tripped the same way in my,
Stay up, I'm gonna bet on you.
Yeah.
Talk about the lion.
Favorite line in the book. This is an old Sicilian saying. I can't pronounce it in Sicilian, but it speaks volumes about the book. What does a lion do to be a lion? Nothing. But a man must respect to hear it said of him, what a lion. Yes, we have a strong man. That was written by Luigi Pirandello. Giuseppe and Maria Brucato immigrated from Sicily and arrived in Milford in 1905 with their son Giovanni. A little bit about the town.
Yeah. I don't need that. So good to see you all. Thank you for coming. And out of everything I've done, I think this has the most meaning and value. It's quite an undertaking, but very satisfying. In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt was in his second term as President of the United States, and the Wright brothers were trying to prove that man was capable of flying. Milford was a small town near the Rhode Island border, situated about 30 miles west of Boston, 18 miles south of Worcester. Transportation was either by horse and buggy or railroad. Originally inhabited by the English, Milford had become a melting pot in the 19th century when Irish immigrants settled there. The town grew even more with the arrival of the Italians in the 20th century. When the Brucatos got here, Milford was a thriving industrial and mining community, due in large part to its unique geography. The Charles River, Mill River, and Blackstone River watershed ran through town, making it ideal for manufacturing. There were also large deposits of rare pink granite in Milford, which attracted companies to mine it. Additionally, there was easy access to Milford with a railway and roadways running through town from every direction. The presence of the mills and the granite companies created a great demand for unskilled labor. And the immigrants from Italy were happy to supply that demand. Giuseppe and other Italian immigrants had little trouble finding work, though their work would involve hard manual labor, especially in the granite quarries. They were happy to get it, but there was a price they would have to pay. In their later years, countless quarry workers would develop what they called stonecutter's disease, medically known as silicosis, or silicosis, a respiratory ailment caused by inhaling dust particles. Those who contracted it suffered from coughing, sputum, and shortness of breath. It often led to premature death. The foundries and manufacturing companies were equally as toxic. Though getting gainful work was not problematic for Italian immigrants, assimilating into the community was another story. By the time the Italians arrived, the Irish had already entrenched themselves in the community both socially and politically. It was easy for the Irish to assimilate. Unlike the southern Italians and Sicilians, they were fair-skinned and spoke English. The Irish and Americanos did not like newly arriving Italians, especially the darker-skinned immigrants from southern Italy and Sicily, whom they considered inferior. As a result, hostility between the established Milfordians and new immigrants from Italy immediately ensued, and the town was split into two separate and distinct communities. The dividing line was a set of railroad tracks, which ran through Milford. The Irish and Yankees lived on the uptown side of the track, where the retail districts, town hall, high school, and Irish church, St. Mary's, were located. The Italians resided in a well-defined area on the other side of the tracks called the Plain, where the granite quarries and manufacturing companies were located. There, they had their own grocery stores, businesses, farms, and a church, Sacred Heart. Interestingly, both Roman Catholic churches were located less than a stone's throw from each other, and albeit on opposite sides of the track. The Irish would never attend Mass at Sacred Heart and vice versa. End quote. So, moving on to the perspective of being inferior. Discrimination against Italians was not restricted to adults. Even though they were born in the United States, 10-year-old Charlie and his paisanos felt the sting of prejudice early and often when they left their enclave to attend school. Public school officials engaged in a startling level of anti-Italian bigotry when it came to their students. Teachers ridiculed Italian school children for their broken English, their clothing, or their parents' inability to speak English or read at all. This was a fact of life in Milford in the 1920s and 30s. It was another damaging and disturbing experience that would impact Charlie's emotional development. Playing baseball became the way young Charlie was able to distinguish himself. Even as a 10-year-old, he possessed incredible agility and athleticism. Though he was small, he was an exceptionally fast runner. None of us inherited that, by the way. In later years, he attributed this to the fact that he ran everywhere. He just loved running. He also possessed extraordinary hand-eye coordination, a trait that made him an outstanding hitter in baseball. He said this was because he spent hours throwing rocks in the air and hitting them with a makeshift bat. The truth was that he was simply a natural athlete with God-given ability. Soon after he arrived in Milford, Charlie gravitated to his cousin, Sammy Tommaso, who was about the same age. The two developed a friendship which lasted a lifetime. They spent all their free time on the town's playground. Both loved baseball and both excelled in school. At the playground, Charlie met two more lifetime friends, albeit from other enclaves in the plain. Henry Tate Bodio and Frank Sui de Gaetano. Everyone in Milford, Italian communities, had nicknames. The four kids were inseparable. Sports drew them together, to kids from other enclaves in the plains and even to kids on the uptown side of the track. They did not share their parents' desire to stay within their own. The plains became a breeding ground for athletes, especially talented ball players. There was no Little League then, and no school teams until high school. The boys learned the game from older kids. Watching the high school baseball team was a welcome diversion for the townspeople. They flocked to the town park to see every home game. A bittersweet commentary in the newspaper said, Milford may not be able to give its people bread, but it certainly does supply them with good games. And of course, this was during the Depression. The big crowd at yesterday's contest between the high school and Walpole was made up considerably of gentlemen who had nothing else to do, while a man who is unemployed is not expected to buy a ticket. It is to be hoped that those who still can pay for their amusement do the right thing by the clubs putting on their show for them. The players did not realize at the time how vital their role was, not only in the integration of town, but also in instilling a sense of pride in its people. Years later, their contributions to the community would be recognized and praised. The history puts it in perspective something I love that my brother Charlie did. As 1935 began, Richard Hauptmann, who was accused of kidnapping and killing the Lindbergh baby, was brought to trial. He was convicted in February. Around the same time, Adolf Hitler reinstated Nazi Germany's Air Force, which violated the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. It was becoming clear in Europe that hostilities were imminent. In the spring, Charlie and his best friend at Holy Cross, Paul Bartolomeo, played on the freshman baseball team. Hop Riapo was their coach. Charlie won the second base position and had an outstanding season. Great things were expected of him the next year when he would get an opportunity to play for the varsity. One of the highlights to him that spring was the varsity's game against the Boston Braves at Fitton Field. Babe Ruth was finishing his career with the team. To say that the Holy Cross players were excited is an understatement. Babe didn't let them down. He was his own larger-than-life self, chatting with each of them and frolicking around the field before the game to the delight of the fans. Charlie said, Babe was past his prime and not in very good shape. That didn't matter to us. Meeting him was one of the biggest thrills of my life. It was also the last season that Ruth played in the Major League. Charlie made it through freshman year and returned home for the summer, where he once again played in the Blackstone Valley League. His team won the championship, and he was the MVP. The Calgary League was a minor league team that Charlie played coach in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. And he took a handful of boys from Milford to join him. Charlie told many stories about his time in the Calgary League. Two of his best involved a 21-year-old pitcher named Edward Rivers. He was a strapping 6-foot, 182-pound right-hander nicknamed Chief because he was, as Charlie put it, a full-blooded Indian, Native American. The Chief was pitching one day and was tagged for a double. Facing the next batter, he went into a full windup rather than pitching out of a stretch to keep the runner on second close to the base. The runner was so surprised by this, he didn't even try to steal third. I called timeout and I went out to the mound, related Charlie. Look, Chief, you should know, you don't go into a windup with a man on second. Just take your stretch. On the very next pitch, he winds up again, and this time the runner does steal third, standing up. I was fuming and returned to the mound and screamed at him, "What the hell is the matter with you?" And I thought he put his tongue in here. "The hell's the matter with you?" It just tells you the pitch of the truck so the guy on second wouldn't steal. The chief looked at me and said, yeah, but it's this way. I could pitch better with a man on third. When he's on second, I can't see him, and that bothers me. But when he's on third, I can see him perfectly, and I don't worry. So I let him steal. Moving on to World War II, and boy, did it open my eyes when I started doing the research. The Marines were tough fun, but they were scared. Charlie and his fellow Marines were especially frightened because they were well informed by their commander on the Japanese war mentality. Colonel Chambers, who was their senior officer, had already been in the fight at Tulagai prior to training his men, and he shared his expectations with them. Influenced by an ancient samurai moral code called Bushido, which arose from Zen Buddhism, Confucianism, and Shintoism, Japanese military personnel adhered strictly to the role of service to their master and country. Surrendering to the enemy was not an option. Suicide was honorable, and murdering fellow countrymen who violated the code was acceptable. Fighting men with this mindset would be brutal. Exhausted and needing sleep, the fighting Marines could never really rest in their foxholes at night. The cover of darkness provided Japanese soldiers the opportunity to make their self-sacrificing banzai attack, which involved close contact and even hand-to-hand fighting. These attacks would result in the death of thousands of Japanese Marines throughout the war in the Central Pacific. The Bushido Code was also imposed on Japanese civilians who were fed the propaganda that Americans were barbaric and they would torture, rape, and kill them. This is not only untrue, but ironic. During the Japanese invasion of Chinese Manchuria prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Japanese soldiers raped civilians and executed thousands of Chinese men, women, and children. That and the Bataan Death March, where Japanese soldiers tortured, beat, and killed an estimated 5,000 to 18,000 Filipino and 500 to 650 American POWs, showed that the enemy was both ruthless and ferocious. Talk about a significant landing, and in this case it was the island of Saipan. And of course they approached the beaches in landing craft, sitting ducks. The landing was vigorously opposed. The opposition consisted primarily of artillery and mortar fire from weapons placed in well-defined positions and previously registered to cover the beach areas, as well as fire from small arms, automatic weapons, and anti-boat guns, sighted to cover the approaches of the immediate landing. Units of the 25th Marine on the right flank were receiving such enfilade fire that they were forced to debark at the beach. Charlie and his mortar platoon hunkered down in this slow-moving LCTV, and they were headed directly into the firestorm. In one of the few stories he shared about the war, he said, "We had no chance. So I looked to my right and spotted a large formation of rocks at the end of the beach. I told the Navy coxswain driving the craft that I wanted him to veer off to the right and head for the rocks at the end of the beach. The coxswain said to me, 'I can't. I have my orders, sir.' So I got right in his face and I told him, son, I'm in command here. And he said, I could tell my boys were happy when he followed my order and broke formation and turned for the rock. Of course, I had no idea if we were headed for an ambush. As it turned out, we were able to unload and take cover. We waited for things to calm down and then made our way back to the unit. Charlie was proud of the fact that he saved his men from almost certain death, and they certainly appreciated it. This is Hiroshima. So this is where Dad won the Purple Heart. And what's amazing is he sustained his wound on the way to the island and had to fight the following 26 days with shrapnel on his shoulder. We were all scared, Brucato said. We're in the so-called fourth wave at Hiroshima. I was in an amphibious tank when we were struck by a shell. I was toppled over into the water. I was hit, but more concerned with the bang I got in the shoulder than I was with the actual shrapnel wound. I couldn't swim, but was able to wade with others slowly to the beach, he explained. Ricardo went on to say that this is the start of the worst 25 days of his life. For the next 24 hours, he was pinned down, dug into the sand, and immobilized by enemy gunfire that was nonstop. The only way we could move was to crawl in, but we had to wait for air attacks to loosen things up. Charlie's wounds would eventually be treated, but he would never leave the battle. In fact, for the remainder of the days on Hiroshima, he and all the other Marines would never be safe from enemy bullets, shells, and Japanese banzai suicide attacks. He and the other Marines who were pinned down and could not move far inland were amidst hundreds of dead Marines and body parts, all from 25th, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion. The enemy was never visible to the attacking Marines, as the Japs were hidden underground or in well camouflaged pillboxes or blockhouse. They could always see the approaching Marine who were forced to gain ground, crawling 5 to 10 yards at a time. With all the enemy fire still concentrated on the beach, Colonel Chambers was able to move about 300 yards inland, halfway to the quarries, which was their objective, but was aware of the mounting casualties of the 3rd, especially K Company, where all 7 officers were dead or wounded at day's end. He knew that I Company was not too far ahead, so Jumpin' Joe and the men, mostly from Headquarters Company, including Charlie, took cover in the massive bomb crater. They died so fast that the whole business of heroes and death is a little mixed up in my mind. You see a man do something almost unbelievable, and a minute later, you'd see him die. Pretty hard to pick out any outstanding men or men. The Battle of Iwo Jima would be recorded in American military history as one of the most epic battles of the United States Marine Corps, and any historian could argue there were few military conflicts which better identified self-sacrifice for God, country, and brotherhood. The first morning after the battle, Chambers and his men were still in the bomb crater. His reflections articulate what he and his Marines believed substantiated their purpose while defining what was important about America. We hadn't had any grub since the previous morning aboard ship when Corporal Dallas Conrad opened up a can of tea ration. There were my people, Abe Bryant, my radio man, an Italian boy from the intelligence section, and some black kids from the Pioneer. Conrad took a spoonful of food, ate it, and handed the can with a spoon to the Marine beside him. He took a bite and passed it on. That can went around the entire group. Catholic, a Jew, some blacks, an Italian, a Pole, an Irishman, a West Virginian hillbilly, and a Florida cracker. None of us cared a damn about who we're eating after. We were hungry Marines in combat. Nothing else mattered at the moment. I am almost finished, and Charlie will read the last quote. A few months after he returned from the service, Charlie welcomed 55 candidates to try out for his first Milford High School baseball team. One of the candidates was Connie's younger brother, Anthony Babe Oliva, the Babe. Though he was a junior, he had not previously played any high school sport. Angelina, she was stern, an immigrant from Calabria, no response woman whose husband had died before the war, leaving her to manage 7 children alone. She allowed Babe and his brother Joe to go to high school, but playing sports, that was another matter. They had to work to help support the family after school. To Angelina, playing sports was privilege. She had not let Joe play, and she was not going to let Babe play either. Charlie knew Babe was a good ball player because he'd seen him perform on the playground. He wanted him on the team. He also knew that Angelina was not going to let it happen. So one day when he was courting Connie, he approached Angelina, who spoke broken English and didn't understand the unique Sicilian language that he spoke. Somehow he was able to convince his future mother-in-law to allow Babe to play. Charlie would develop a warm relationship with Angelina over the years, even though she always said he was stubborn. A stubborn Sicilian. Babe earned a position on the team as a starting third baseman. The 1946 team would launch Milford's second golden era of baseball under the leadership of one of the stars of the first. In September, the National Security Act of 1947 created the United States Air Force, National Security Council, and Central Intelligence Agency became effective. In that same month, Charlie began coaching another successful Milford High football team. They won 5 games, lost 2, and tied 3. One of the wins was against a powerful St. Mary's team, 7-0. Before the game, Charlie knew that St. Mary's posed a difficult challenge. They had a back named Buster Carline, who was unstoppable. Charlie worried all week about how to defend him. His standard defense was not going to be enough. And losing to Milford High's crosstown rival would be devastating and embarrassing for him. As he lay awake in bed a couple of nights before the game, he came up with a scheme that he thought would work. He called his assistant coach, John Calagione, woke him up out of a sound sleep and told him to come over. Together they worked on a plan until nearly dawn. The strategy worked. All eyes were soon centered on the annual Thanksgiving Day Classic with St. Mary. A crowd of 2,000 turned out to witness this battle of the century. St. Mary's dominated in the first stanza of the play, but in the second stanza, the Milford team shook off their lethargy, collected its focus, and propelled co-captain McCausland on a thrilling and dramatic touchdown run. The victory was secured with the extra point added, giving Milford 7-0 victory and permanent possession of the Algarini Trophy. More importantly, for Connie, because Charlie's team had won, Thanksgiving dinner wasn't ruined. So this is that famed team that made it to Fenway Park where they used to play the state championship. In the state tournament, Milford defeated Malden Catholic 3-1 at Fenway Park. The highlight of the game came when Gardy Rec became the first schoolboy ever to homer over the high left field wall known as the Green Monster, with a 365-foot blast into the net. Milford next beat Dorchester 8-7 to earn a place in the finals against a strong Concord High team at Fenway. In the game against Concord, Milford was able to squeak out a 2-1 win, but not without drama. Concord loaded the bases with 2 outs in the 9th inning. Lamenti was pitching, and Charlie went to the mound and asked him if he was tired. After he walked away, Lefty struck the next batter up. Charlie told a local paper later, he had spunked that kid. He looked at me and said, "No, Coach, I'm not tired. Don't worry. I think I can get the next hitter." I told him I thought he could too, and he did. He came through as I thought he would. Bobby Pagnini had a different account of that mound meeting many years later when he was making a speech at a banquet to honor his old coach. Charlie was quite a hummer. Still does it today. Whenever he's doing some thinking, he starts humming. We were leading 2-1 in the last of the 9th inning, and Concord had the bases loaded. Lefty Lamenti was pitching, and the count was 3-2 in the hitter. Charlie called timeout, went to the mound to settle Lefty down, and then went back to the dugout. Lefty struck the batter out on the next pitch to win the game and the tournament. After the game, Stanley Jones, sports writer, asked Charlie what he had said to Lefty to settle him down because it obviously worked. Charlie said, he told Lefty that it's just another game. If we win, we win. If we lose, we lose. Don't worry about it. You're a good pitcher. Just get over it. So later, Stanley asked Lefty to follow up on what Coach said. Lefty had a completely different version. And he said, Charlie wasn't humming. So to conclude my reading, it's just reflective of how the Bronc felt about athletics and what was important. So in concluding remarks at the baseball banquet that year, he gave a glimpse of what he believed to be real importance of sport. Anyone who had spent many hours perfecting the fundamentals of baseball had acquired a habit that will make it easier to devote many hours to mastering the fundamentals of good living. They will make better Americans since they know that they can achieve success if they are willing to work for it. I've been the recipient of many compliments during the season just passed, but the one that stands out above all came following the final game with Concord in the Red Sox dressing room. I approached and asked the 2 clubhouse boys why they had rooted so hard for Milford since the start of the series. And their reply was, they're a nice group of boys, and they play so awfully hard. I cannot think of a better tribute 2 strangers could have given to any team.
I asked my grandchildren to write what they thought of my father, and I included it in the book. I'd just like to share 2 of them, one from my son and one from my sister's son. This is my son. My grandfather was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he either said something profound or profoundly hilarious, most of the time intentionally. His words were born of thoughts, deep thoughts, and rumination on all sorts of subjects. Mostly sports, primarily baseball, sometimes politics, possibly gambling, often what it meant to be an honorable man. all substantive, or at least substantive to him. My memories of him are nearly all a commentary on these subjects, and our conversations almost always dealt with sports, especially baseball. He was a great man who'd seen much in his life and lived the most formidable part before I was born. He lived a difficult life, albeit a very large and extraordinary one. He literally came from nowhere and nothing, but possessed incredible talents and street smarts that led him to world-class athleticism on the biggest stage and war on a global stage. His memories were torment of the awful things he experienced, but I think that his torment was equally about the burden of relating to those around him who were not remotely as talented, nor would ever achieve or be recognized anywhere near him. After all his achievement, rubbing elbows with literal legends and heroes, and I'm sure he considered missed opportunity, he returned to a small town in our small minds. I'm sure that he thought about how the war cut his elite athletic career short every day. How could we be anything less than disappointed? Or, as he put it, horse, whatever, yeah, as he would say. He was a god walking among mortals. Understanding his background and perspective has helped me make sense of my grandfather being a man of few words. As his namesake, I seemingly inherited his brevity, and our words with one another were limited and mostly from him to me and not vice versa. We mostly talked about hitting a baseball, but in reflection many years later, I realized that baseball was a metaphor for life. He cared about me deeply and he wanted me to succeed, even though he knew I could never be as great as him, which I am sure pained him. He talked about pulling the ball, which was getting ahead of the ball, a metaphor for life, and hitting it with the most powerful position. This would give you your best chance of hitting a metaphorical home run. He talked about working the pitch count, turning the situational odds of life in your favor and patiently waiting for your pitch opportunity. He talked about hitting for power, again attacking the ball, life. There was a lesson in this one about what he deemed being a man. He talked about how much hard work and thousands of hours of batting practice the great ones like Ted Williams would take to become great hitters. For me, these were profound, fundamental, and invaluable lessons that I've carried with me in everything I've done, from baseball to football to school to business to being a father, husband, and family man. These lessons allowed me to get the best of my talent. I may not be the elite Charles J. Brucato, but I am a not-so-bad Charles J. Brucato III. I hope someone someday will say I did the name proud. I think I did, but I'm just happy that I'm not a horse after all. And this is from John Tobin, and this is the last of the readings. No living person ever really knows what a true legend was. That's what makes them legendary. Everything is heard second, third, or fourth hand. The stories are passed down through the generations, and each generation adds their own layer to the story. These are our folk heroes, their feats seen by seemingly everyone but us, who are cursed to live in the times after him. John Henry, Babe Ruth, George Washington, Charles Joseph Brucato. There are two parts of my grandfather in my mind, and I have a difficult time merging. First, there's the legend, the man who was a standout athlete who somehow lived through the Great Depression by stealing milk for his family, only to fight a brutal war and live because he overruled the orders of a foolish Navy coxswain. That's who I always thought of as the man who everyone in town respected and looked up to. The other part is the very real and flawed man that I knew. He was patriarch of the family and a man that I don't think I ever really knew. And that was because I was too afraid to approach him, as his reputation preceded him. He had an air of power and force. Looking back, he seemed broken at the end. I remember a tired soul who was very likely the product of a lifetime of constant, quiet, internal struggle. I now wonder if he was impatiently awaiting the end and was irritated that it was taking so long to find the peace he may never have known in his life. But even in death, he sits at the head of the family table. You can't be in the presence of any of his children and not hear some reference to him. There may be no better example of legacy than that to hold court in a room almost 30 years after exiting the stage of life. Each story and impression a curtain call, the hopes of an encore that sadly will never be. Legends always leave you wanting more. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. If you have any questions or any comments you'd like to make, John and I are here for you.
Charlie, how old was your dad?
He was late 20s. Yeah, so he
So he
had graduated college and that's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think what made it so good back then, made the time so enjoyable, but no one had anything. But you didn't know you didn't have it. Because everyone had the same thing. And they lived, you mentioned it at the start, they lived in an era where no one had a real name. Everyone had a nickname back then. And you talk today about the old people, you mentioned Suey Digatano. You mentioned your father, the Bronc. Just as an example, your father lived across the street from 4 brothers. Charles, who they called Snooky. Ronaldo, who they called Roink. Vincent, who they called Malutz. And Benjamin, who they called BB. No one knew their real names. My father, no one even knows how my father got the name Fofo. He was your father's, one of your father's cousins, and my father's brother was your father's best friend. And it was a neighborhood that they stuck together forever. And they only had good qualities. That's all they had. They had nothing, but they had everything.
Thank you, Charlie.
Nice.
Well said. Well said. Okay, thank you all for coming. I deeply appreciate it. When I wrote the book, I didn't think anyone would read it. And I was amazed at the response all of you gave me and John. And it's really a humbling thing. I hope that I have communicated what was a time, as Charlie said, when people had nothing, but as he put it, they had everything. Jimmy.
I thoroughly enjoyed the book, being friends with you and your brothers. My parents were from Milford. My grandmother and grandfather lived on School Street. My grandmother they both came from Scotland, and they were on the other side of the tracks. I learned about the tracks very early. They went to the Episcopalian church because they were Presbyterian, coming over from Scotland. My mother's uncle was Sergeant Ray Cross. Sergeant Ray Cross, and I can remember as a little boy him telling different stories about both the Italians and the Irish. But reading the book gave me a better understanding, not just of the Italians that I played ball with over in Milford years ago, but of, as Fofo, Junior, whatever he is, said, learning what these people went through. My grandmother's father came over from Aberdeen, Scotland, and he was a stonemason. Worked in the quarries up in Barry, Vermont, and then came down to Milford. And listening to them, tell those stories. But it was very interesting from someone that's not of Italian heritage. You can just look at me and my freckles, what's left of them. But to know what that generation of people went through, living in Milford, which has certainly changed dramatically from even when we were kids, to have an understanding of the what they probably didn't know they were poor because they're all like that, but how they worked their way up the ladder, whether it be in a mill or being a teacher or what have you, and they led successful lives, and they did everything for their children and their families. So there was a lot I liked because I saw my parents growing up in Milford and coming through this.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, again, many thanks for sitting through this. I hope you enjoy the book if you're going to read it. I couldn't be happier to see all of you here, and I could not be more humble. Thank you.